All right, let's get into this. Today, we are really going to take our time with a concept that you hear more and more about, metamodernism. We're not in any rush. The whole idea here is to slowly unpack what it means to be alive in a culture that seems to be moving past the solid certainties of old, but also past the cynicism and irony that came after.
And I'm here to keep us grounded. My whole job today is to keep asking, okay, but what does that actually look like? What does that feel like for someone just trying to get through their day? If we're really charting some new cultural map, I want to know what the roads and the houses look like, not just the satellite view.
Couldn't agree more, and we've got a plan for that. We're going to start by really digging into the problem, this feeling of exhaustion with both the old, simple answers and the constant irony that took their place. Then, we're going to look for clues, for evidence of a shift, in three really different areas: in philosophy's hunt for truth, in religion's search for some kind of depth, and in art's attempt to find a new way to be sincere. And finally, we'll try to pull it all together and ask what it even means to rebuild after an era of just taking everything apart.
Sounds like a journey. Let's hope the destination feels familiar.
Okay, so, Section 1. Before we can figure out where we're going, we have to get a really clear picture of where we are and why it feels, for so many of us, like we're kind of culturally stuck. We need to understand the vacuum that metamodernism is trying to fill. It's born out of a specific kind of exhaustion.
And to start, we've got to get this key definition down. The source calls a cultural paradigm a shared background atmosphere. And I love that phrasing, because it's not a set of rules you learn. It's more like the weather. It's this invisible framework that quietly tells you what feels normal, what makes sense, and what kind of attitude you should have toward the world. It's the water we're all swimming in, usually without even noticing it.
Okay, hold up. Background atmosphere. That's exactly the kind of phrase that sounds smart, but means nothing if we can't pin it down. Let's make it concrete. Let's say a huge piece of news drops, like scientists have definitively confirmed the existence of simple microbial life on Mars. How does a person living in a modernist paradigm process that news versus someone who's completely steeped in a postmodern one?
Ooh, that is the perfect test. Let's really get into that. So the modernist, they're living in a paradigm of progress, of big stories, of human achievement. They see that headline, and for them, it's a moment of pure triumph. Their posture is optimistic, serious. They're thinking, this is it? Humanity's next giant leap. This is proof of what science and reason can do. This will unite us as a species, solve our petty squabbles, and set us on a course for the stars. The news just slots perfectly into their grand narrative of progress. It's a clean break with the past, a moment of pure aspiration.
A total Star Trek moment. Got it. So what about the postmodernist? Same news alert pops up on their phone. What's their gut reaction?
Their gut reaction is suspicion. The postmodern paradigm is all about being skeptical of those big, grand narratives, so they immediately start to deconstruct the whole event. Their first question is, okay, who's framing this story and why now? What powerful interest does this discovery serve? Just listen to the language they're using. Mankind, destiny. These are just words. They're ideological tools. Is this whole thing just a high-tech media stunt to distract us from the climate crisis or to justify a bigger Space Force budget? For them, there's no such thing as the raw event. There's only the story being told about the event and the power structures that story supports. Their posture isn't aspiration. It's critique.
Wow, okay. So one sees a bright future, the other sees a conspiracy. That makes the idea of a paradigm feel much more real. It's the default setting for your brain.
Precisely. And this slide lays out those defaults. Modernism, like we said, has this deep trust that we can understand the world and remake it for the better. It's all about that serious, heroic break with a messy past to build a clean future. Postmodernism, on the other hand, is defined by that deep suspension. The philosopher Jean-François Lyotard famously called it an incredulity toward meta-narratives. It just doesn't buy the big stories anymore.
Okay, let's stress test this with another messy, real-world example. A city council announces a massive, ambitious, utopian public housing project. The goal is to end homelessness and build a beautiful, rational, new community. Let's put a modernist architect, a postmodern critic, and a meta-modern urban planner in the room. How does each one react?
Perfect. So, the modernist architect is electrified. They're thinking, finally, we can apply rational design and new technology to solve a social problem. We'll create a master plan with clean lines, functional spaces, and scientific efficiency to engineer a better way of life. This is a serious moral calling. They are totally sincere, totally aspirational. They design a massive, uniform, top-down project. Think Le Corbusier. And the postmodernist critic sees those blueprints and immediately starts writing a blistering takedown. They'd argue that this so-called utopia is actually a form of top-down control. They'd say, look at this rigid, one-size-fits-all design. It completely ignores the cultural differences and the actual messy lives of the people who will live here. This isn't a community, it's a surveillance machine, an arrogant attempt to impose a single sterile logic on human beings. They would deconstruct every claim to universality and expose the hidden power dynamics at play.
Okay, so that leaves the meta-modern urban planner. The idea has been proposed with great hope, and then it's been intellectually dismantled. What's left for them to do?
And this is the whole game, right here. The meta-modern planner can't go back to that naive modernist confidence. They've read the postmodern critique, and they know it's basically right. They know that grand, top-down plans can be incredibly destructive. But they also can't just stop there and write another cynical article, because people are literally sleeping on the streets. So their approach is different. It's pragmatic. It oscillates. They might say, okay, the single grand vision is a fantasy, and a dangerous one. But the desire to house people is real and good. Let's hold that sincere hope in tension with our critical awareness. So instead of a master plan, they propose a series of smaller, modular, adaptable projects. They organize endless community workshops. They embrace messiness and compromise. They're trying to build something, but with the full, painful knowledge of why the last generation's attempts to build something failed. They hold sincerity and critique in the same hand at the same time.
And that leads us straight to this foundational quote from the theorists who really kicked off this whole conversation, from Ullin and Vandenacker. This concept of oscillation is the absolute heart of metamodernism. It's not a compromise, it's not some mushy middle ground. It's a dynamic, constant swinging back and forth between a modern-style enthusiasm and a postmodern-style irony.
Let's really unpack oscillation, because that could just sound like being wishy-washy. What does it actually feel like in your gut in a real situation? I'm thinking of something like going to a political protest for a cause you really truly believe in. How does the oscillation show up there?
That's a perfect case study. Okay, so a pure modernist might be at that rally filled with this unshakable, sincere enthusiasm. We are changing the world. Our cause is righteous. We are the heroes of this story. A pure postmodernist might not even go. Or if they did, they'd be at the back, ironically commenting on the cheesy slogans, the way the media is covering it, the whole performance of it all. They'd be thinking, this is all just a spectacle. It doesn't change anything.
So where is the metamodern person in that crowd?
The metamodern person is feeling both of those things at once. They're in the middle of the crowd, chanting the slogan, and part of them feels this genuine swell of hope, of community, of sincere belief. That's the modern enthusiasm. But at the exact same time, another part of their brain, the part that grew up with The Daily Show and Twitter, is acutely aware of the irony. They're thinking, I know this slogan is a cliche. I know how this looks on TV. I know the system I'm protesting is infinitely complex, and this one march isn't a magic bullet. They feel the sincerity and the critique simultaneously. And the key is they choose to act. They choose to be sincere despite knowing all the reasons to be cynical. It's a willed sincerity.
And that feeling is captured beautifully by these two phrases from the theory. Informed naivety is exactly that. It's the choice to be naive, to believe in something, but with your eyes wide open to every reason not to. It's a post-critical innocence.
And pragmatic idealism feels like the action that comes from that mindset. It's the what do you do now part. But I really want to get inside someone's head here. Let's create a character, a 22-year-old climate activist. Let's call her Maya. She's read the science, she knows the political system is riddled with corruption, she knows corporations are greenwashing, and she knows that recycling isn't going to save us. So what is the actual thought process that makes her a pragmatic idealist instead of just a naive dreamer or a burned-out cynic?
Okay, Maya. So, the naive idealist thinks, if we just get enough people to sign this petition, the politicians will see the light and fix everything. The total cynic, who is kind of the endpoint of postmodernism, thinks it's all rigged, the corporations have already won, why bother? Maya, the pragmatic idealist, rejects both of those. Her inner monologue might sound something like this. Okay, I know this specific climate bill we're pushing for is deeply flawed. It's full of loopholes for industry. I know the senator we're lobbying is compromised, but it is the only viable political vehicle on the table right now. Getting this flawed bill passed is pragmatically better than the alternative, which is nothing. So I will act as if my ideals can make a difference, even through this messy, imperfect system, because giving up is a luxury we don't have. She rejects the simple purity of the ideal solution and the simple despair of inaction. She is trying to build something from the ruins of her own disillusionment.
And that idea, rebuilding from the ruins of disillusionment, is the absolute perfect segue into our next section, because now we're going to look at the intellectual engine room. We're going to see how philosophers are trying to do the exact same thing, to recover a way to talk seriously about truth, after postmodernism did such a thorough job of showing that all our old foundations were built on sand.
Now, this is going to be the most demanding part of our conversation, but it's so important.
We're going to slowly walk through these 6 thinkers. The source presents them as a group united by a single difficult task. How do you move through the postmodern critique without just pretending it never happened? You can't just go back to talking about truth with a capital T. So each of these thinkers is trying to find a way to recover words like truth, reality, and meaning, but in a way that the text describes as chastened, mediated, socially embedded, and fallible.
Okay, a list of 6 philosophers. I'm already a little suspicious that they fit together this well, so I'm glad we're taking our time. My mission here is going to be to stop you on each one and ask, how does this incredibly abstract idea actually change how a person thinks or lives? Let's start with Habermas.
Okay, Jürgen Habermas. His big idea is to change where we look for reason. Postmodern thinkers were brilliant at showing that reason with a capital R, this idea of some pure objective bird's-eye view on truth, was a myth and often a dangerous one. Habermas basically says, I agree, there is no metaphysical tribunal in the sky. Instead, he says, reason is something we do together. It lives in our conversations. When we sit down to have a real argument, we're implicitly agreeing to play by certain rules, to give reasons for what we say, to listen to the other person, to be willing to change our minds. Truth isn't a thing out there. It's what emerges from that honest process of mutual justification.
I get the ideal, but the world is not an ideal place. If reason is just a social practice, what prevents it from just being about who's most powerful or who's the best talker? Let's take 2 scenarios. First, a corporate boardroom where a powerful CEO is trying to push through a really sketchy business plan. Second, a university philosophy seminar where students are trying to understand a complex text together. How does Habermas's idea of communicative truth hold up in those 2 wildly different rooms?
That's the exact right question. The university seminar is the closest you get to what Habermas calls the ideal speech situation. Everyone in that room is, supposedly, motivated by a shared goal understanding the text. The power imbalances are relatively low. The explicit goal is to let the strongest argument win. In that context, the idea of truth emerging from communication seems pretty plausible.
But that boardroom is a shark tank.
Exactly. The boardroom is what Habermas would call systematically distorted communication. The CEO isn't there to find the truth. He's there to win. He's using language strategically, not communicatively. The social practice is happening, people are giving what sound like reasons, but it's a performance warped by power and money. But here's the crucial move Habermas makes. His theory gives us the language to critique what's happening in that boardroom. We can point to it and say, this is not a rational discussion, because you're using your power to shut down debate, you're not being sincere, and you're not actually open to being wrong. So even in a situation where reason is being abused, the ideal of a fair and honest conversation still exists as the standard we use to judge it. He saves reason by making it a promise we make to each other whenever we try to have a serious talk.
Okay, next up is John McDowell. He's wrestling with a classic philosophical headache. How do our minds connect with the world? The debate was always stuck between 2 poles. Either the world just dumps raw, meaningless information onto our senses, or our minds are just trapped inside our own language like a prison, never actually touching reality. McDowell tries to bridge that gap. He says our experience of the world is already infused with concepts. The world is real, and it pushes back on our thinking, but our only way of accessing it is always going to be through the concepts we have.
That feels slippery, very philosophical. I need a picture. Let's get really specific. An art critic and a particle physicist are standing next to each other on a hill, watching the exact same sunset. They are both experiencing reality. How does McDowell's theory explain how they're both touching the same reality, but their understanding of it is completely different?
That's the perfect way to see it. So for McDowell, neither of them is just receiving raw data of photons hitting their retinas. Their experience is shaped by their concepts from the very first moment. The physicist literally experiences the sunset as an event of Rayleigh scattering, of light waves bending through atmospheric particles. Her concepts of physics aren't something she applies after she sees the color red. They are the very lens through which she experiences that red. Her thinking is being constrained by the real physical event, but it's happening through her conceptual toolkit.
And the art critic?
The art critic is experiencing the same physical event, but she experiences it as a study in contrasting palettes, an echo of a Turner painting, a perfect example of the sublime, or a moment of profound melancholy. Her concepts from art history, from aesthetics, from poetry are also shaping her experience in real time. And here's the key for McDowell. He insists that both of them are in genuine contact with the world. The world isn't just a fiction created by their different languages, but their access to that world is inescapably mediated. He gives us a kind of chastened realism. We really are in touch with the world, just never in a pure, innocent, unmediated way.
This ties in perfectly with Robert Brandom. For him, the meaning of a word isn't what it points to, like a dictionary definition. Meaning is a social job. When you say something that means something, you are taking on a set of commitments and entering into what he calls the space of giving and asking for reasons. It's all about what you're now responsible for defending and what you're giving other people permission to conclude. The source calls meaning a normative achievement.
Normative achievement. Okay, let's unpack that with a sentence that carries a ton of weight. A doctor looks at a patient and says, "The tumor is benign." That sentence is loaded with meaning. According to Brandom, what is the whole bundle of social commitments and responsibilities that the doctor just took on by saying those 4 words?
Let's break it down, Brandom style. First, by saying the tumor is benign, the doctor is committing herself to a whole bunch of other beliefs. She is implicitly stating, I am qualified to read this pathology report, I have in fact read it, and this report meets the established medical criteria for being non-cancerous. Second, she is licensing the patient to make other claims and feel certain ways. She's giving them permission to think, I can stop worrying, or I won't need chemotherapy. Third, and this is key, she is taking on the responsibility to provide reasons if she's challenged. If the patient says, how can you be sure? She is now obligated to walk them through the report, to explain the science, to justify her claim within the shared norms of medical practice. The meaning of her statement isn't a static definition, it's the active, social role she just stepped into. She is now accountable in the shared space of reasons.
Now we turn to Maurizio Ferraris, and he represents a much more direct pushback against some postmodern ideas. He's reacting to the way social construction became an explanation for everything. Ferrari says, hold on. Just because our access to reality is shaped by society doesn't mean reality itself is soft and squishy. He argues that reality is unamendable. It resists us. It pushes back, whether we like it or not.
Okay, for a rock or a mountain, that makes perfect sense. I can believe the mountain isn't there, but if I try to walk through it, the mountain's reality will win. But what about something that feels like it is 100% a social construct, like money? A $20 bill is just a piece of fancy paper. Its value seems to exist purely in our collective imagination. How would Ferraris argue that there's an unamendable reality to that piece of paper?
That is a fantastic question, and it goes right to the core of his new realism. Ferraris would probably make a distinction. He'd say, yes, the initial institution of money was a social act, a collective agreement. But once that system is created and written down, once it's documented, it takes on a reality of its own that is very unamendable to my personal wishes. If I take that $20 bill to a store and I declare that I've decided it's now worth $2,000, the reality of the economic system is going to push back very hard. That system, though it was born from social agreement, now exists as a set of external constraints on me. And the physical bill itself is unamendable. I can't just wish it into being a $100 bill. Ferraris' whole point is that postmodernism took a good idea that some things are socially constructed and stretched it so far that it started to seem like everything was just a matter of interpretation. He's trying to reintroduce the stubborn, hard-edged pushback of the world.
And Marcus Gabriel offers a really interesting twist on this realism. He agrees with Ferraris that reality is not just our invention, but he argues against the idea that there's one single grand world with a capital W, one final theory that explains everything. Instead, he says reality is made up of countless different fields of sense, and things are real within those fields. So the number 7 is real in the field of mathematics. Harry Potter is real in the field of literature. A cork is real in the field of particle physics. My chair is real in the field of everyday objects.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how Gabriel's idea of all these different realities fits with Ferrari's idea of one reality that pushes back. Let's imagine a real-world conflict. A legal battle over a piece of land between an indigenous tribe and a mining corporation. They have profoundly different understandings of what that land is. How does Gabriel's framework help us understand their conflicting fields of sense, without just shrugging and saying, well, they're both right in their own way?
That's exactly where his theory gets its power. For the mining corporation, that land exists within a field of sense defined by property law, geological surveys, and market values. In that field, the land is a collection of assets, a resource to be monetized. For the indigenous tribe, that same physical place exists within a totally different field of sense, one defined by creation stories, ancestral burial grounds, and sacred ecology. In that field, the land is a living relative, not an asset. Gabriel's framework lets us say that both of these fields of sense are real, and the things inside them, like property deeds on one hand and ancestral spirits on the other, are real within their respective fields. The conflict isn't about one side being right and the other being delusional. The conflict is the tragic result of two real fields of sense overlapping on the same patch of ground, forcing a legal system to decide which reality it will recognize and enforce. It allows us to be realists about both claims without having to reduce one to the other.
And our last thinker here is Charles Taylor, who gives us a map of the emotional landscape we all live on. He argues that life in the modern West takes place inside an immanent frame, this general feeling that the world is all there is, that it's a closed system that doesn't need God or spirits to explain it. But, and this is his key idea, we are constantly living under cross pressures. We're pulled in one direction by this scientific, disenchanted view of the world, and in the other direction by a deep, persistent human hunger for meaning, for transcendence, for something more.
That feels incredibly true to life. Let's make a character to explore that. Let's imagine a brilliant geneticist. By day, she maps the human genome, understanding life as a complex, material biochemical process. But on weekends, she goes hiking in the mountains and feels a sense of awe and wonder that feels, well, spiritual. It's a feeling her science can't quite capture or explain away. How does Taylor's idea of cross pressures describe her inner world without just calling her inconsistent?
Taylor's framework is made for her. He wouldn't see her as inconsistent at all. He'd see her as a perfect embodiment of the modern condition. Her work in the lab is a powerful activity within the immanent frame. It explains life beautifully without any need for a supernatural creator. That's the powerful pressure of disenchantment. But her experience in the mountains is the counter-pressure, that stubborn longing for transcendence, for a sense of meaning that overflows the material facts. Taylor's whole point is that this tension isn't a problem to be solved, it is the modern condition. She is living in a world where belief is a choice, not a default, but where the echoes of enchantment and the pull of the sublime are still incredibly real forces, even in a secular age. Her inner life isn't a contradiction, it's the very tension we all have to navigate.
And that experience that Taylor maps out so well, living in tension, searching for depth in a disenchanted world, is the ideal launchpad for our third section. Because that disenchantment, that immanent frame, has been put on hyperspeed by a very specific force in our lives, being totally saturated by digital technology. The search for seriousness we saw in philosophy shows up here as a search for depth in religious practice, as a direct response to modern life.
This really is the core question for this section. When your entire environment is buzzing with notifications, endless feeds, and algorithmic suggestions, where can you possibly find stillness and depth? And it's more than just being busy or distracted, isn't it? The source talks about platform-trained habits, and that really resonates. It's that feeling that my brain itself has been rewired to crave novelty, to want that little dopamine hit of the next post, the next video. The entire digital economy is built to be hostile to silence, to repetition, to anything that is slow. So the question isn't just how do you find time for depth, it's how do you retrain your brain to even be capable of it.
And the source gives us this amazing framework to think about that. It talks about our digital lives as a rival liturgical formation. Now, a liturgy isn't just a church service, it's any set of repeated practices that shapes what you love and what you desire. And the liturgy of your phone, the endless scroll, the constant turn of new things, the personalized ads, it's training you to desire novelty, speed, and effortless consumption. As a direct response, many religious traditions are digging deep and retrieving what this slide calls counter-liturgies.
I love that comparison. Let's make it concrete. Let's map out a single day for two people. We'll call them Alex and Ben. Alex's life is totally shaped by these digital liturgies. Ben is actively trying to live by the counter-liturgies. What do their mornings, their commutes, their evenings actually look like?
Okay, great idea. So Alex wakes up. First thing, before he even sits up, he grabs his phone. The liturgy begins. The endless scroll through a feed designed for novelty, outrage, a joke, a celebrity, an ad. The algorithmic personalization shapes what he thinks is important. On his commute, he has his headphones in, consuming a podcast, optimizing every second. His evening is spent scrolling through streaming options, this frictionless mobility from one piece of content to another, looking for the next thing to hold his attention. He's perpetually available to his work, his friends, the world. His desires are being trained daily for passive, personalized, instant gratification.
And Ben, with his counter-liturgies?
Ben's day has a different rhythm. He wakes up and instead of the phone, he maybe sits in structured silence for 10 minutes. That's a direct counter-liturgy to the endless stimulus. Maybe his morning prayer involves a repetitive chant or reading the same text he read yesterday, a counter-liturgy to the churn of novelty. On his commute, maybe it just looks out the window. He's resisting the urge to fill the empty space. In the evening, instead of infinite choice, he has a specific practice. Maybe it's going to a real physical place to meet with other people, a bodily gathering. Or he takes a long walk, a kind of mini pilgrimage. He is intentionally adding friction and repetition back into a life that is designed to be frictionless and new. He's trying to retrain his desire toward presence and attention.
And there's a perfect real-world example of this, the Taizé community in France. They are a prime example of this metamodern retrieval. It's this monastic community that is incredibly popular, especially with young people from all over the world, and their entire life revolves around ancient embodied practices. 3 times a day, every day, they gather for a simple prayer service made up of repetitive, meditative chants, a short reading, and a long, long period of total silence.
But I'm seeing here that they use digital networks. They live stream their prayers. That sounds like a complete contradiction. They're using the primary tool of digital distraction and fragmentation, the internet, to broadcast an experience of silence and unity. I need you to unpack that. How is that not just selling out? How does that actually work in a way that isn't self-defeating?
I think it's more interesting than a contradiction. It's a classic metamodern oscillation. They are not naive. They're not pretending the internet doesn't exist. They pragmatically use the digital network to reach people who can't be there, to invite them, to create a global sense of connection. But, and this is the key, look at what they are inviting people into. The form of the prayer itself is a direct antidote to the medium it's on. The slow pace, the repetition, the long silence, it all structurally resists the logic of the internet. You can't really doom a scroll while you're watching a Taizé live stream. The quietness itself demands a different kind of attention. So they are using the tool of fragmentation in a self-aware way to point people towards its opposite, embodied, communal, focused presence. It's using the master's tools not just to critique the master's house, but to build a quiet chapel in the backyard.
And this whole idea of trying to recover something real and deep from within our totally mediated world leads us straight to our 4th section, the world of art. The art world is often like a seismograph for culture. It feels the tremors of a new way of feeling before anyone else. And the huge challenge for artists recently has been, how can you possibly be sincere after postmodernism made irony and detachment the default language?
A perfect example of this is the installation The Visitors by the Icelandic artist Ragnar Kjartansson. It's a piece with 9 large video screens. On each screen, there's a different musician in a different room of this big, beautiful, slightly decrepit mansion. They're all performing the same song at the same time, but they're all physically alone. You know, the setup itself sounds totally postmodern. Fragmentation, isolation, connection that's only possible through technology, through screens. And artists in the 1990s would have used that exact setup to make a bleak point about how alienated we all are, how we're trapped in our own little media bubbles. So what is Kjartansson doing that's so different that he turns that setup into something that people describe as communal and incredibly moving? That's the perfect question, because the difference is everything. The musicians are all wearing headphones so they can hear each other. They are genuinely playing together. And the song they're playing is this long, repetitive, deeply sad and beautiful ballad. So as you, the viewer, walk through the space, you can stand in front of one screen and focus on the guitarist, then move across the room and watch the cellist. But you hear all of them together as a single, unified band. The artwork takes the very tools of our separation, the screens, the headphones, and uses them to stage this profound act of connection. The fragmentation doesn't create alienation, it highlights the beauty of togetherness achieved in spite of that fragmentation. It acknowledges our mediated reality, but then finds a way to generate a real, shared, and deeply sincere emotional experience right in the middle of it. It's moving through irony to get back to feeling.
And for a totally different example, we have this group called forensic architecture. They're not making art about feeling. They're a research group made up of artists, architects, and scientists who use artistic techniques to investigate human rights violations. They fully embrace the postmodern insight that video evidence can be manipulated, that official stories are just narratives, the truth is political, but they don't leave it there.
This sounds fascinating, like practical philosophy. Let's make up a scenario to see how their method works. Let's say there's a mysterious chemical spill from a factory near a small village. The corporation says it wasn't us. The government issues a confusing report, and the local villagers' testimonies are being ignored. How would forensic architecture investigate that to build a case that could cut through all the denial?
Okay, here's how they would operate. They wouldn't search for a single, perfect smoking gun video, because they know that's a postmodern fallacy. Instead, they would begin what they call investigative aesthetics. They'd gather dozens of grainy cell phone videos taken by different villagers at different times. They would use architectural 3D modeling software to stitch all those different viewpoints together, creating a navigable virtual model of the factory and the spill over time. They would analyze the length of the shadows in each video to verify the exact time it was taken. They'd pull satellite imagery to track the plume's movement and cross-reference it with weather data. They take all these flawed, partial, mediated fragments of evidence and weave them together into a single, cohesive, and verifiable model of the event. They use their postmodern knowledge of media's unreliability to build a more robust, collective truth. They're not just deconstructing the official lie, they are meticulously reconstructing a public truth.
An phrase right there, reconstructing a public truth. That is the perfect launch into our final section. This is where we pull all these threats from philosophy, religion, and art together and see if they really do weave into a single, coherent cultural logic.
This chart really does a great job of laying out the whole argument we've been building. You can see the exact same three-step pattern in every single column. First, there's a problem. In philosophy, the old foundations for truth crumbled. In religion, digital life flattened our experience. In art, irony just got boring and became a dead end.
And in each case, the postmodern response was powerful but ultimately left you with nowhere to go. It gave us endless critique, detachment, parody. It was incredibly effective at taking things apart.
Exactly. And what we've been tracing this whole time is what the chart calls the metamodern retrieval. Philosophy tries to get back to truth, but in a chastened, more humble way. Religion retrieves ancient, embodied practices as a counter to the digital onslaught. Art finds these clever ways to create a mediated sincerity, to be genuinely moving without having to pretend it's 1950. And I want to just circle back to our examples because they all live on this bottom row. The metamodern urban planner, our activist Maya, the scientist who loves Bach, they are all living out this logic. They are all attempting to retrieve something meaningful after the critique has been heard and absorbed. That's a really important distinction. It's not a return, it's a retrieval. You can't just pretend the critique never happened and go back. But you can try to rebuild something new using the pieces you have left, including the rubble of the thing that was deconstructed. Which brings us to the final and, I think, profound question that the source leaves us with. This really feels like the challenge of our generation. The old modernist certainty feels naive and impossible, but the postmodern disbelief, the cynicism, that's also started to feel like a pretty unstable and unsatisfying place to build a life.
And after going through all this, it's pretty clear that metamodernism isn't some neat and tidy answer to that question. It's not a comfortable new belief system. It seems to be more like an ongoing, difficult, and maybe very necessary practice. It's the practice of that pragmatic idealism we talked about at the very beginning. It's the conscious choice to build and to hope and to try to mean something while being painfully aware of all the reasons why that's a complicated and maybe even absurd thing to do. It's not a place you arrive at. It's just a way of walking, a constant oscillation, a constant struggle to hold both hope and doubt in your hands at the very same time. And maybe, right now, that's the most honest way to be.